Thank you all for being here. So tonight, we've got a program from Al Wangler. Al is a longtime member of the Bismarck Historical Society. I remember Al, about a year ago, talked to me about this idea of doing a program about old restaurants in Bismarck, and I thought it was such a great idea. People have such vivid memories when it comes to food and restaurants. I know my dad moved to Bismarck in 1964, so I grew up hearing about the lunch counter at Lucas Department Store and the Italian Village and places like that. So I've been looking forward to this one for a long time. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Al. I'm going to let him tell you a little bit about himself. He's got a slide with his bio, and I hope you all enjoy it. Thanks for coming.
My name is Al Wangler. A little bit about me. I was 4 years old when I moved to Bismarck in early 1959, and I've just never left. I attended St. Mary's Grade School in the old building on the corner of 9th Street and Broadway Avenue for 8 years, and what a beautiful building that was. If you were ever lucky enough to navigate the front staircase, it was a 4-story solid wood structure on the west side of the building, the 9th Street side, and it was amazing. I attended Simley Junior High for 1 year and Bismarck High School for 3 years, graduated in 1973. I attended Bismarck Junior College for 2 years, and I've just never left. I've remained a proud Bismarck resident since. I remember the time when we walked a mile to school, even as youngsters. We didn't lock the doors in the house unless we went on vacation for a week. The only time we took the keys out of the ignition of the car and locked the doors was in the fall when tomatoes and zucchini were in full harvest. And you did that so that you had room in the car when you came back out, so you could go to the grocery store, either Dan's Super Value or Red Owl, and the stock boys would carry your groceries out to your car for you. I live in Bismarck with my wife, Patty. We've been married for 43 years. We have 4 children, 8 grandchildren. We're lucky enough to have 3 of those 4 children and their spouses and 7 of our 8 grandchildren in Bismarck. I've been interested in Bismarck history and have attended many of the presentations over the years. I've been a member of the Bismarck Historical Society for several years, and this is my first attempt at a program. Before I formally begin, I'd like to publicly acknowledge that much of the information that I found online was at bismarckcafe.com. It's administered by Mr. Randy Hoffman, and I thank him for being so generous in sharing the information that he has compiled about our great city. Now on with the show. The 1960s and 70s restaurants. When I first started thinking about this project, I thought about how far back do I go? How far ahead do I go? When I looked at the 60s and 70s, I had way more than enough to fill this hour. So, over the years, there have been dozens of restaurants that have come and gone in Bismarck. In my research, I found the names of 32 restaurants that were located in Bismarck pre-1960. I didn't expand my research previous to that because most of my information came from the internet, and there's very little online about eating establishments before that time. 16 restaurants opened in Bismarck in the 1960s, and 65 new restaurants opened in Bismarck in the 1970s. One of the interesting things I found about my first research was that most of the restaurants were in downtown district. Many of the restaurants that opened in the 70s were franchise locations, some were corporate stores, and most were located outside of the downtown district. Bismarck was going through a great growth spurt in the late 60s and early 70s, with Interstate 94 going through the north side, Kirkwood Mall and the Bismarck Civic Center being built on the south side in the early 70s. First, I'll generally cover the timeline of eating establishments during the 60s and 70s. And then I'll cover what I call my fan favorites, or the survivors. There were several restaurants on the edge of town. Tyler's Cafe was listed in early data as being part of Tyler's Campground and Cabins on the very west end of Bismarck. It's where the Holiday Inn was later located and where the Bank of North Dakota now sits. If you look at that top right picture there of the Holiday Inn, right there, you'll see the A&W Drive-In. So that was on the west end of town. The Holiday Inn, that's where the Bank of North Dakota now sits. We'll talk a little bit more about it later in the program. The campground was among the first things you saw when you came into Bismarck on Highway 10, because it was the only way into Bismarck from the west. You had to go down to South Dakota or up to Newtown in order to get across the river if you didn't come across the Memorial Bridge at that time. So Tyler's Campground and the A&W were the first things that you saw. Among those that were not located downtown were Bill's Alley Lunch in the Bismarck Bowling Center at 305 North 23rd. That building now houses the Heartview Foundation Recovery Center, owned by the Tom and Frances Leach Foundation. The main cafe was referenced at 2111 East Main Street until sometime in the early to mid 60s. That location is now the Corral Bar. Another eating establishment downtown, not downtown, was Wrestler's Cafe. It started in 1949 at 214 North 6th Street. And that's west across the street from the Memorial Building and the Bell Mayhews Auditorium. This building at 214 North 6th became the Shriners Cafe. In the 70s, the Q&R utilized the building as a study area and library for their nurses before the building was demolished. The location is currently a parking ramp. You're going to find I say that a lot about downtown. It's currently a parking ramp. In about 1956, Wrestler's Cafe relocated to 2219 East Main Street. Around 1973, they put an addition on the back end that was a 2-story affair, and they called it Wrestler's Back Door. And I believe it was more of an upscale type dining establishment, probably open only in the evenings. In 1976 or 1977, the name was changed to Casa del Rey, and they moved to a Mexican-style atmosphere in that back portion of the restaurant. No more listings for the back door after 1977, and Wrestler's Cafe closed around 1979. The building is currently office space and is located just west of the Bismarck Motor Motel. Some of the main names that many of you may remember for eating establishment from the 50s and 60s that opened as early as the 40s and remained for many years are the New City Cafe. It was at 306 East Main Street, located on Main Street where the 3rd Street parking ramp is. Tom and Bob's in the GP Hotel. The entrance was on 4th Street, just north of the main entrance of the Grand Pacific Hotel, which was on the corner of 4th and Broadway, and the GP Steakhouse in the Grand Pacific Hotel on the corner. Patterson's main dining room, which closed for a period of time, was reopened as the Patterson main dining room, closed again, and when the renovations of the Patterson took place in the 70s, brought back the opportunity for it to become what we now know as the Peacock Alley. Fink's Cafe showed opening in 1948 at 123 North 5th Street. That'd be just north of the alley where the Parkade building is at, where White Drug was. It moved across the street to 116 North 5th prior to 1965. It was rebranded as Bob's Cafe and remained there until about 1972. It then became known as the Red Carpet Lounge in 1972, and I believe that the owner of all three of those establishments was Bob Fink. Downtown hosted several eateries that I remember as a kid, although I'm not sure I ever ate at any of them. They included the New Sweet Shop located at 408 East Main in a building now occupied by the Blarney Stone. The Beacon Coffee Shop at 316 North 5th was in the Provident building that closed in 1978. Likely the coffee shop was named after the iconic weather beacon on top of the building. The Chinese Rice Bowl at 112 North 2nd closed sometime between 1960 and 65. The Coffee Cup Cafe was located next door at 116 North 2nd and operated until about 1971. The Greyhound Bus Depot had a fairly large restaurant on the corner of 7th and Broadway, site of the Sanford Hospital parking lot. The restaurant remodeled around 1970 and became the Coachman Inn, or I think as the picture says, the Stagecoach Inn. The Italian Village Pizza was located at 302 East Main, at the time right next to the Elba Room. Jack Lyon's hamburger stand was a very popular spot located at 511 Broadway. Its location was on the Broadway side of what is now the 6th Street parking ramp. The owner of that was at one time a riverboat cook. He succumbed to his wife's demands to stay closer to home. He opened and ran several business ventures, finally settling on a hamburger stand that supposedly used sweet Valencia onions along with several seasonings to make a fantastic hamburger. I was also told that his mother raised cows for milk and that he sold her milk at the restaurant. This 1960s era's photo shows a very small interior of the hamburger stand. He passed away in 1947, but the hamburger stand survived him by several years, and it was taken over by Earl Schwartz. The Lighthouse Cafe was located at 708 East Main and remained there until 1972. That location is now a parking lot for the expanded Sanford Same-Day Surgery building on the corner of 7th and Main. And I was told during my research that the sign from the Lighthouse Cafe was taken to 1415 East Front Avenue. There was a machine shop down there and the sign was repurposed. It's the one in the lower corner, repurposed as a sign for that particular business down there. The Prince Hotel had a cafe at 114 North 3rd. Lucas, the department store on 4th, had a very popular cafeteria and lunch counter located in the basement of this department store. Woolworths on the corner of 4th and Main had a lunch counter until the downtown store closed in the early 1980s. Several of the downtown drugstores had soda fountains, and while they did not truly serve as restaurants, they did serve all the treats associated with soda fountains: shakes, malts, banana splits, sundaes, and sodas. Soda fountain locations over the years in Bismarck included Finney Drug in the GP Hotel, Hall's Drug in the Logan Building, and Plaza Drug at Arrowhead Plaza. Another name that came up, and I had never heard this, was You Ought to Eat, U-A-U-T-O, Eat. And it was located at 112 West Broadway. It's east of Mandan Street on the north side of Broadway Avenue. Location is now the parking lot of the Broadway Business Center. I don't remember anything about that restaurant in the buildings. It was closed by 1965. Does anybody remember that place? Other listings in the 60s included the Airport Cafe at the Municipal Airport, Missouri Slope Livestock Cafe, likely open up only on sale days, located west of Bismarck, just north of the railroad tracks on Yagan Road. The Downtowner was located on 4th Street between Broadway and Thayer. West side of the street, its signboard is still on the building. It's just south of what was the Dakota National Bank. It operated through 1977, then became home to Scotty's Jr., Short-lived Scotty's Jr. relocated in 1978 to 1045 Interstate Avenue, and that's presently the home of the Country House Deli. The Autodyne opened in 1964 in downtown Bismarck on 7th and Main. It was a regional drive-in restaurant. It was noted for its octagonal building. Perhaps the most popular menu item on Autodyne was the Big Auto Sandwich. Customers could also receive a coupon for bringing in recyclable aluminum cans. The franchise was formed in 1962 with headquarters located at 121 North 5th Street in downtown Bismarck. A Chicago office was soon established as well, presumably in anticipation of national growth. Despite its local origins, the first Autodyne location to open were in Moorhead, Minnesota, and Aberdeen, South Dakota, with Bismarck's restaurant opening in late 1964. Bismarck's Autodyne closed in 75 or 76 when an all-American sub-franchise opened in its place. That too was out of business by 1980. The location is now home to McDonald's. 1969 gave us our first country kitchen, located at 1307 East Interchange Avenue. That location later became Carrie's Kitchen. I don't have a time frame of when that change took place or how long it was Carrie's Kitchen. The building is now gone and has been replaced by O'Reilly's Auto Parts. A second location for Country Kitchen opened in 1971 at 1301 East Main Street. After Country Kitchen, that building was home to Ron's Family Restaurant, Weisbeck's Family Restaurant, and was most recently an office location for Prairie Farms Land O'Lakes Dairy. It has recently come on the market when Prairie Farms closed the creamery located on 12th and Main. 1969, we saw the building of the Parkade Building on 5th and Broadway. Several retail locations occupied that building on the ground floor, including White Drug and the White House cafeteria. The 70s were busy. 1970, we saw Country House Deli open in the Polar Plaza on 21st and Thayer. Polar Package Place and Lucky's Bar are in that building. Country House Deli eventually moved to 1045 Interstate in the location where Scotty's Jr. had been. They're still operating in that same location. Snoopy's Pizza and Sub replaced the Teen Club Cafe at 212 West Main Street. It was located in the Careful Building on the far west end of Main, across the street from Active Life Chiropractic. Nasty's Pizza and Nugget Cafe also appeared in 1970 in the same building as Snoopy's Pizza and Sub. And I believe that was the guy's name. They called him Nasty, if I remember right. Bonanza Sirloin Pit opened in 1970 at 2000 North 12th Street. They rebranded to Bonanza Restaurant and eventually to All-American Steak Buffet before Schlotsky's and Cinnabon took that location. Sad to say, Schlotsky's closed just late last month and the location is currently empty. I find a restaurant called Dick and Lil's located on Highway 83 North. It opened in 1970, was gone by 1971, but the city directory just said North Highway 83, so I have no idea what it was. Steve's Snack Bar was located in 1970 in the William L. Guy Federal Building, 220 East Rosser. It rebranded as Doc's Coffee Mug in 1979. Carol's Parlor Restaurant opened in 1971 at Arrowhead Plaza. The Carousel Snack Bar opened in Kirkwood Mall, as well as the popular 4B's Cafeteria in Kirkwood Mall. Sirloin Stockade opened at 424 South 3rd. That building eventually became Howard Sirloin Stockade, and that's now home to Applebee's restaurant. McDonald's came to town in 1971 at 2207 East Main. The McDonald's on Main was built without a dining room or a drive-up. It was a drive-in the same way that Scotty's and Autodyne were. You pulled up to the building, you entered the lobby, ordered your meal, went back out, sat in your car, at the picnic tables, and that's where you ate. The dining room was added in the summer of 1972, and the drive-up window was added about 1980. Taco John's appeared at 1922 East Broadway, and I mean they appeared. They were at that time a prefabricated building, much like a mobile home that was constructed in Wyoming where the corporate office was. The location site had groundwork being done, a parking lot went in, there was a foundation there one day, and the restaurant appeared overnight and was open within a matter of a few days. And I distinctly remember that because I worked at McDonald's at the time. And when the Bismarck Tribune published a picture of Taco John's opening up, one of our assistant managers was walking through the door. Village Inn Pancake House was added in 1972 at 405 South 7th, the current home of Denny's. That was the second location for Village Inn Pancake House. No, there was a second location, I'm sorry, on Highway 83 that eventually became the International Stir Fry. That building moved when the La Quinta Motel was built. Now, if you look at the sign, yeah, can you back up one, Ann? Okay, if you look at this sign here of the Village Inn Pancake House, this is the actual building down on South 7th Street. That's Walk to Grade School in the background. This is Bowen Avenue. And I asked Mark tonight, he said 1976, he believes, is when 7th Street went two directions. Or 1976 when it went to one way. It was a two-direction street before that. And I remember that sign, if you see it, the marquee reads from the east and west. And when 7th Street went one way, they turned the sign, and on the south side, they put on the marquee, it said, "You're going the wrong way, quick, turn in here." I remember seeing that sign on their marquee. Mr. Steak came to Bismarck at 431 South 3rd Street in 1973. Its location is now a parking lot for CVS Drugstore. They also had a second location later at 1500 Interchange Avenue that opened in 1976. Village Inn Pizza opened at 434 South 3rd Street. That building housed a Blimpie's sub shop and a Rack's roast beef outlet by 1984 and is now the site of the Ground Round since 1992. That's 23 new eating establishments in 4 years. Then came 1974. Mr. Donut opened as a coffee shop and bakery at 720 East Broadway, just west of St. Mary's Church. The location is now a parking lot south of Al's Barbershop and Robert's Floral. The Fun Factory opened at 3014 North 11th Street in 1976, the same year as Century High School did. And it closed about 1980. It featured fast food, several pinball machines, 2 air hockey tables, 8 pool tables. That's on the same block as Century High School. Bismarck Public Schools now owns that building. Pizza Hut at 2020 North 12th Street opened in 1975 and is still at that location. Husky's Cafe opened in 1976 by the Husky truck stop on the west end of Bismarck just before you cross the Grant March Bridge on I-94. location is now the site of On the Run, McDonald's, and Texas Roadhouse. It might have looked much like this Husky's location in Williston. 1976, we also saw the pepper mill open at 404 South 3rd Street. It operated till 1979 when it was replaced by David's Fine Foods. The building later housed Hollywood Nights Video, Planet Video, America's Mattress, replaced them after fire damaged the building. It went on to house a bank and is currently vacant. Hardee's at 1303 East Capitol Avenue came in 1976 and is still at that same location. Hardee's also had a location at 302 South 3rd Street, operated for many years. That current location is home to Cricket Wireless. When drive-up service became all the rage for the hamburger joints, Hardee's footprint did not allow an easy way to do a drive-up. So a complicated conveyor system was installed over the dining room. It was noisy and inefficient. You placed your order on the west side of the building. The kitchen and lobby were on the north side and the east sides of the building. Dining room and drive-up was on the south side of the building. You pulled up to the drive-up window during non-dinner hours, placed your money on the conveyor. It traversed over the top of the dining area to the cashier. They loaded your meal and your change on the conveyor and sent it back to you. Took forever and was very annoying to the dining room crowd. Going into 1977, we saw Casper's East 40 come into the picture at 1401 East Interchange Avenue. It's currently operating as 40 Steak and Seafood, excuse me, and is an upscale restaurant that is one of the only in the area that ages its steaks on site. Happy Joe's Pizza and Ice Cream Parlor came to 2420 North 14th Street, south of Kmart. It had a lively interior of bright colors and costumes that the staff was regaled in. It operated in that location until 1984, and then it moved to the Exxon station at 2921 North 11th Street. Arthur Treacher's Fish and Chips was another addition at 320 South 3rd Street in 1977. That operated from 1977 to 1981, became the Copper Penny Restaurant till about 1983, and then Taco John's after that. It remains a Taco John's location today. Another fast food location to join the South 3rd Street group in 1977 was Burger King. It is still operating in the same location today at 315 South 3rd. Northbrook Red Owl added a dine-in establishment in 1977, as did the Townhouse Motor Inn on State and Divide. That location was eventually the home of Minerva's Restaurant. 1978 was another banner year for growth. Enchiladas Mexican Grill came to 302 South 9th Street. That's just south of Carpet 1. Location is currently an insurance agent's office, but it offered an array of dining establishments over a very short period of time, including the International Diner, all nationalities in 1979, the Kiekle Corner, German, Sakura Oriental, Dakota Burgers, American Fare, and the Cock and Bull Chicken and Burgers by 1989. So in 11 years, there was at least 6 tries at success. The Cock and Bull moved to 900 East Bismarck Expressway, the current Wendy's location, in 1993. Caesar's Family Restaurant opened at 1065 East Interstate and operated from 1978 to 1984. That location is now the China Star Buffet. 1100 Weiss Avenue became the location of Chapter 1 Restaurant. It wasn't around a long time, and that building eventually became home to the End Supermarket, corporate offices, and is now a medical therapy facility. It's just north of Family Fair and south of Menards in North Bismarck. The Golden Dragon appeared on Main Street at 412 East Main, in the building now occupied by the Blarney Stone. Duke's Pizza, which was an offshoot of a successful pizza place in Linton, opened at 1121 North 13th Street in the Boulevard Plaza on 13th and Boulevard. The owner of that establishment was listed as having passed away just last week. Perkins Cake and Steak House, opened at 1100 East Interstate Avenue, is still in the same location. The chain changed its names to Perkins Restaurant and Bakery. Skipper's opened a restaurant at 505 East Bismarck Expressway. The building has changed hands several times and is currently La Carita Mexican Restaurant. Northbrook Mall got a snack shop in 1979. The Walk, an Oriental cuisine restaurant, opened its doors at Northbrook Mall in 1979 and currently operates as the China Garden restaurant. Gateway Mall, which opened in the very late 70s, got a snack stand. There was a Taco Time that opened in Gateway Mall about that same time. Wendy's opened at 2112 North 12th Street, now the location of Dakota Bank. It's been home to several bank branches over the years. It's just north of Capitol Avenue on State Street and across the street from the Pizza Hut on the north end of Bismarck. Now I want to concentrate a little bit more on several of the restaurants that I consider survivors. By that, I mean they were here in the 60s, like many of us, and they're still here today. 1968 saw Kroll's Kitchen, now Kroll's Diner, come to 1915 East Main Street. There have been several changes to that location, including added seating over the years. Kroll's has also added several locations, including 2505 North 13th, the site of what was the Rolling Pin Restaurant, and on the strip in Mandan is what's referred to as the Shiny Diner. Dairy Queen at 230 West Broadway Avenue was considered the first drive-in in Bismarck. While it technically did not have a drive-up, it also didn't have inside seating. This Dairy Queen in Bismarck predated the A&W by 2 years and the Big Boy Drive-In by 6 years. The Dairy Queen product itself was first served as soft serve ice cream in an ice cream store located in Joliet, Illinois. On August 4th, 1938, the first servings were sold, and in 2 hours, they served over 1,600 servings. Dennis the Menace was the cartoon character spokesman until 2001. Dairy Queen opened a second location at 2021 East Main in 1970 in Bismarck. The location has since become an office building. Most Dairy Queens in the United States also serve brazier foods, hamburgers, fries, hot dogs, chicken strips, and of course, the iconic Blizzard. That was introduced in 1985. The Blizzard is one of the most successful items ever introduced, as in its first year of operation, or in its first year of sales, there were more than 175 million units sold across the country. Dairy Queen had several locations in Bismarck, including the original one located at 230 West Broadway, Dairy Queen at 1804 North 13th on State Street, and 913 Burlington Drive. A&W Drive-In opened in Bismarck in 1950. It was located at 1207 Memorial Highway on the west end of Bismarck. Its location, like Tyler's Campground and Cabins, made it one of the first places you saw when you entered Bismarck from the west. The A&W Drive-In was noted for being a restaurant that didn't offer inside seating, although the Bismarck location had a screened patio to sit and dine. But to enjoy A&W, You didn't have to leave your car. There were canopies with car hop stations. Your parking space had a little tray under a menu board that had a speaker and a microphone on it. You made your selections from the menu board, pressed a call button, an taker would take your order, and while you sat in your car, the restaurant would put your order together and a car hop would deliver your meal to you on a tray. These trays were designed to hang on your car window. While most of your meal was served in disposable containers or wrappers, your iconic A&W root beer was served in a chilled mug. When you were done eating, you simply placed the tray and the mugs on the station you left. Their menu included the burger family, the Papa Burger, which was 2 patties with all the trimmings, the Mama Burger, a smaller version with just 1 patty, the Baby Burger, a still smaller version with all the trimmings, and the Teen Burger, 1 burger patty with cheese and bacon. I remember that you could bring your own jug or buy a gallon jug from them and purchase the tap-drawn root beer by the gallon. We used to do that occasionally going to a picnic. The restaurant was open until 1991 or 1992. It was later home to Doc's Veterinary Clinic and is now location of the medical marijuana dispensary. Bismarck eventually had 3 other A&W restaurants, 304 East Front, it's currently the First Western Bank, 3120 North 14th, currently Wendy's Drive-In, and 1160 West Divide, currently the location of the Cenex service station on Turnpike and Divide. Another iconic restaurant came to Bismarck in 1954. Bismarck Big Boy was opened by Harley McDowell in 1954 as a drive-through more than a drive-in restaurant. It is still a drive-through, parking and outside seating. Kentucky Fried Chicken joined its arch rival Big Boy in 1957. Big Boy and Kentucky Fried Chicken were not generally in shared locations around the country. At the time that Kentucky Fried Chicken came to Bismarck, it was only the 4th franchised Kentucky Fried Chicken in the country. Harley McDowell, Big Boy's local owner, and Colonel Hartland Sanders were personal friends. City records indicate that the Big Boy's current building with its swooping roof was built in 1956, and it was listed in business listings as Bismarck Big Boy prior to 1965, then became McDowell's Big Boy. That record has to be incorrect. If you look at this photo, if we can go back one, I think. If you look at this photo, Colonel Sanders is there. That would have been 57. I'm not positive of the car, but I'm thinking it's about a mid-60s Ford Fairlane that's there. I also don't believe that that building would have been built in 54 and replaced in 56. So that particular city record is wrong. The building permit says 1956, but the drive-through location at Big Boy has endured and grown for several decades. Over the years, there were several other locations of Big Boy in Bismarck. First at 603 East Thayer, the southeast corner of 6th Street and Thayer Avenue. A new building replaced what was an old Standard Oil service station from about 1970 to 1982, according to what I've found. It then relocated to become a cross-the-street restaurant, 210 North 6th Street, literally across the street from where the building was, and was eventually rebranded as Burgie's. These buildings are both now gone, and the Thayer Avenue location was demolished for Q&R's addition, and the 6th Street address is now a parking lot, or a parking ramp. The Little Cottage Cafe, located at 2513 East Main, is an old-fashioned diner. It's still about good food, fast, reasonable. Almost everything is made from scratch. The homemade vegetable soup is still made with hand-cut in the restaurant vegetables. Caramel rolls are fresh and hot every day, along with bread bowl salads and homemade soup served in fresh-baked bread bowls. Breakfast sausage patties are pressed in the restaurant. The food is served good and fast and hot. It's always busy, but the wait never seems that long. The history of the Little Cottage is quite interesting. I was told that the building that houses the Little Cottage Cafe was likely a restaurant from Tyler's Cafe on the west end of town. From Tyler's Campground, I should say. City records show that the building was built in 1962, but relocated to 2513 East Main Street in 1964 or 65, about the time that the Holiday Inn was built on the west end of Bismarck. Remember that the cafe was placed just east of the Big Boy. And if you're familiar with the concrete wall that anchors the menu board at the Big Boy, I was told that in 1965, when the Little Cottage was relocated to that location, Harley McDowell was furious over the city leaders allowing another restaurant to be placed there. So he built the concrete wall to screen the Little Cottage building from his customers' view. And down in that lower corner, you can see that concrete wall with the Little Cottage in the background. At the time that it was moved out there, I find that it was named the Chateau Inn. And in 1973, it was rebranded as the Little Cottage. Now, Bob and Wanda Sayre, the current owners, were told that it was briefly called the Pancake House, but they can find no records verifying that information, so. But I find it interesting that Tyler's Cafe was one of the first things you saw when you entered Bismarck from the west. When they closed it and moved it, it was one of the first things you saw when you entered Bismarck from the east. Because at that time, the interstate coming through, you had to get off on an exit to get into town. If you came in on Highway 10, you drove right by the Little Cottage. The Drumstick Cafe opened its doors in 1958. It was opened by Frank Ives, and it was a staple in downtown location at 307 North 3rd. It originally opened as a fast food restaurant and had a drive-up window for ice cream and fast food service. Now that's currently Gartner's Capital Shoe Hospital on the right, but they had a drive-up window. The restaurant was sold to Arnold Brunsville in 1961. He reformatted its menu and went traditional at that time and renamed it the New Drumstick Cafe. In 1964, Roland Hauks purchased it and sold it in 1965 to his sister, Toots Cook. In 1976, Clarence and Marilyn Bauman purchased it and remained its owners for the next 22 years. It was purchased by Linda Holznagel and Hilda Barnhart in 1995. It was popular with the downtown crowd during the day and the all-nighters after the bars closed, as it was open 24 hours a day. It remained at that same location for its tenure and closed around 2002. Its location soon became several different restaurants, and it closed for several years and is now just recently reopened. Scotty's Drive-In opened in September 1964 at 210 North 21st Street. It advertised 15-cent hamburgers. They soon celebrated their first Christmas at that location. The local franchised restaurant was started in 1964 by partners Bob Cook and Bob Hintz. Scotty's Drive-In is considered the third oldest continually operating restaurant in Bismarck, behind the Broadway Dairy Queen and the Big Boy. By 1966, there were 7 locations in at least 6 states. The chain disbanded in 1968, and the surviving locations began operating independently. Bismarck's operated as Sandy's for a short period of time before reverting back to Scotty's. After the closing of the Aberdeen, South Dakota location in June of 2024, the Bismarck location is one of only 3 original survivors. The sign at the Scottsbluff, Nebraska, Scotty's, and the sign at the Idaho Falls, Idaho location also still have the flying saucers, officially called googies. I don't know. The 2 Bobs owned Scotty's until 1973, when Bob Cook bought out Bob Hintz. That same year, Richard and Carol Rorick acquired 25% ownership, shortly after Richard graduated from college. He had started working for Scotty's in 1964, just months after it opened. Within a few years, the Roricks acquired full ownership from Cook. The Roricks maintained ownership until 2007, when it was purchased by David and Nancy Turner. The Turners remodeled and updated with indoor seating added in 1985. A drive-through was added in 2008. In January 2016, Scotty's again changed hands when local restaurant manager Kurt Dilger acquired the restaurant, and he's still the current manager and owner. For decades, Scotty's was known for its non-written recollection-based ordering, where the order taker would verbally recite the entire order by memory into the kitchen, rather than formally recruiting it. Or formally transcribing it, I should say. Scotty's famous Rebel Burger was named in honor of Jack Fisher, a radio personality known as the Old Reb, who ruled the early morning airwaves on KFYR radio, 5:50 a.m. for many years. That is still an iconic menu item at the Bismarck location. It consists of 3 hamburger patties, 2 slices of cheese, and all the fixings for a great burger. I remember as a kid that we would occasionally get to go eat out away from home. And maybe a couple of times a year we would get to go to Scotty's. Each of us kids got a hamburger. We probably got 2 or 3 orders of fries to share. And then we'd come home and Dad would make a bowl full of chocolate malt. And I remember the mixer hitting the stainless steel bowl as that stuff mixed up. That was always a treat. The famous A&B Pizza showed up at 1823 North 13th, just north of the Dairy Queen on Highway 83, in the same building as King's Food Host. More on King's Food Host a little later. A&B Pizza eventually had several other locations in Bismarck, including Interstate Avenue, South 7th Street, and Kirkwood Mall. There are still locations at Interstate Avenue and South 7th Street, and there's one located in Mandan. The final food feature that I have for 1979 is the rebranding of King's Food Host to the Woodhouse. Now, King's Food Host opened in Bismarck in 1969 at 1825 North 13th Street. The franchisee was William Wood. The parent company for King's Food Host ran into financial difficulties, and in 1979, Wood, who now owned the restaurant, gave the new place his own name. That was the birth of the Woodhouse. This longtime local restaurant was iconic for its ordering system. Guests seat themselves and placed orders at their leisure through a phone system connected directly to the kitchen. The menu offered traditional diner-style foods, but to some, the fan favorites were the cheese Frenchies. I believe that the world's best hamburger platter was much better than the cheese Frenchie, but it had fries, onion rings, coleslaw, and Ann and I agreed that that was better. Wood sold the Wood House in 2018, and the new owner closed the restaurant in July of 2022. The building now houses Ikaban Ramen, a Japanese and Asian bistro. Suffice to say, the 60s and 70s was a time period of great and rapid change in the landscape of both North and South Bismarck. It's hard to believe that from the 70s, that time frame of the 70s is 50 plus years ago. As I did this, and I come to the end of it, I kept thinking, I'm missing so much. But I have it through 79. So the things that you remember, restaurants, those kind of things, they're after 1979. Thinking back, it seems like a long time ago that I remember these establishments showing up. I need to say a special thank you now to Ann for all the work she put into this presentation. She was my guiding light. She was my guiding light during the time of research and assembly of information. She probably came up with at least as many pictures as I did, a lot of information, and the work she did to put this presentation, including the PowerPoint, together. Without her help, we would not have been possible to be here tonight. Thank you, Ann.
Labor of love.
That concludes my presentation tonight. Thank you for attending. Does anybody have any questions?
You want to give me the handheld?
Yep.
You got the handheld microphone there.
Oh, okay. When I was out and talked to Kurt Dilger, the owner of Scotty's, Ann had mentioned that he's got these wooden bucks. And I thought maybe I could get 10 of them. I got 100. So we got one for everybody. So if you'd each take one, I'd like to give the rest back to him. He was generous enough to just give them to us, but it's a good way to go back out to Scotty's. You know, if you haven't been there in a long time, it's food that's not good for you, but it's good.
I also just noticed in the paper that they advertised that Scotty's has their hot hamburgers back with the potatoes and the gravy all over it. I'll start the ball rolling because when we were talking, I asked him if he had ever heard of the Coffee Cup Cafe. And my great aunts lived in a house north of Bismarck Theater. And I think it's the Long Association building now is there. And across the street were the U.S. Bank's parking lot, where the house where my mother was born. So if you walked a block down from my great aunt's house, north of the Bismarck Theater, across Broadway, you'd hit right at the Coffee Cup Cafe. It later became known as Lydia's Coffee Cup Cafe. And Lydia got her start in the sticky bun cooking for the A.W. Lucas company in the basement of their cafeteria. So that's a memory that I have along with, they say, your sense that has the strongest connection to memory is your sense of smell. And I remember the days when we were kids and we'd go downtown and shop in the downtown district. And the two smells I can remember distinctly were Jack Lyons hamburgers and the sticky buns from A.W. Lucas. So before I turn it over to other people, I want to give a big hand to Al.
Thank you.
Is there anybody that would like to have some memories here?
Al, did you come across anything for the second Big Boy location that used to be at 6th and Thayer?
I mentioned it.
Was it?
It was in a building that was constructed in place of a standard station.
I've got pictures of it being torn down.
Oh,
I've seen those.
well, I got pictures of it being up.
Okay. I remember eating lunch there. My grandmother worked downtown, and we would go visit her once in a while. So.
You actually reminded me of that when we were visiting one day, and I had completely forgot about that location. I knew they had been across the street where Shriner's Cafe and Restner's eventually was, but, or had been, but.
It's really nice that all the work that you did with this, and it is fun to go back. I'm not that old, but it was fun to hear all about it. Anyway, I wanted to just bring up something up. I did my PhD work on food and culture, and you can see in just those 20 years, the culture was changing greatly. And it's been very interesting for me to see in the last few years how the culture of this city is changing. And food industry not only impacts, how we live and our culture, but our economic system right now, we have between healthcare and food systems. So the food system that's happening now is something we should pay attention to. And then one more thing about Scotty's Drive-In. My husband worked for a steel company in the early 60s on the strip in Mandan. And he welded structural steel at Scotty's Drive-In. And if you notice how it's put together when they got the bid with that steel company, the front of the airport is very similar. They also did all of that. So the economic impacts of all of these restaurants carries into many other things. So, thank you.
You're welcome.
Mike's up for grabs.
I was trying to remember, because I was young in the 60s, a couple of locations. I seem to recall a cafe at the bottom of Cohen Drug. They had a lunch counter down there, I think.
In the Cowan Building. Gardner's was down there, the shoe hospital.
And then they had a gift place, the visionary place that I recall.
And then the only other thing I was trying to remember is Scotty's 5 and 10, if they had a lunch counter. Seemed to think they did.
Yeah.
Giant store.
That I guess I'm not sure either if there was it Rustan's 5 and Dime or something maybe? Besides Woolworths, did we have another one downtown?
Not that I know of.
Okay.
This is anecdotal. I don't know if it's been documented, but my recollection is when the Italian Village pizza on 3rd and Main that was next door to the Elder Room, when that closed, the A&B was, the people took over that recipe, and the A&B pizza still has the Italian Village.
That was Village Inn. Wasn't it? No, I'm sorry, Italian Village, right.
Village pizza.
The story I always heard that the B in A&B was Barth. And she was one of the kitchen people, the cooks, made the dough, whatever, at Italian Village Pizza, is what I've heard.
That's one of those smell and taste memories.
Now you said what the B was for, what was the A?
I think Anderson is what my uncle lived next door to Barth's. And that's all I know, is that, and all of my cousins worked at A&B Pizza over the years. But the B, I understand, was for Barth, and the A was for Anderson, but I've heard just recently that that's not a true statement, so I may be creating a rumor. It's what I remember hearing. So.
I
I'm probably wrong, but I thought when the China Star was, it was first called the Royal Fort, because our children loved going there.
You're right. It was the Royal Fort.
We might have missed a few steps in between because people get changed places so often. Just like David's Fine Foods. How many of you remember when that was in the Logan building?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, and then that takes us into the next generation up from the 70s into the 80s. So I'm sure you're holding your breath with just waiting for the next installment.
In the 40s.
Well, boy, that would be difficult, I'm afraid. I had so much fun doing this.
This isn't necessarily food, but down at 4B's, as a kid, we thought it was the coolest thing to get the dime to go to the bathroom. I had to pay a dime to get into the bathroom there, so it was a big thing when we got that dime to be able to go to the bathroom. If we wanted to go more than once, it was too bad.
He was also a student at Wangler when I taught there. Sue taught there, okay. And 4B's was the bane of our existence. We had 45 minutes for lunch at that time, and the kids just streamed over to Kirkwood. I mean, it became a traffic difficulty for the police.